So I'm Kenneth Bailey. I'm one of the founders of Design Studio for Social Intervention. We started about 15 years ago during a residency at MIT in the Urban Studies program. It was through the Center for Community Reflective Practice at the time, and now that outfit is called CoLab. And we started really to help the social justice sector imagine new ways to solve social problems. The studio does a lot of resident engagement, a lot of placemaking work, a lot of speculative work to help us imagine new futures, a lot of work in sort of art and social change and art and intervention. We see ourselves at the intersections of the art world, the academic world, and the activist worlds, and we try to bring those different perspectives together a lot to share the different takes on what constitutes the world and how the world is structured and how change happens and how to think about and try new approaches to social change. And I'm going to tell a quick story that led to this, one of the stories that led to the start of the studio, to give you a sense of the thinking that we were trying or are still trying to intervene in as I go into the rest of these stories. So before I started the studio, my background was in organizational development and leadership development. I was a coach for community organizations, executive directors for quite a while, and did a lot of strategy and planning work, particularly with organizations that were interested in reintroducing their residents or their constituents into the part of the organizations and their, sense of governance and power and the like. And we had one contract with an organization here in Boston, 20 years ago, 25 years ago. I was hired with another consultant to help a large nonprofit here reconnect with a series of community leaders and neighborhood residents and neighbors, sort of organizers who run street groups and block groups and sort of keep neighborhoods coherent. That network of people had disconnected itself from the large organization that was hoping to rebuild relationships with that kind of grassroots neighborhood leadership. They had gotten really pulled into more of a service delivery organization and had lost their sort of organizing roots. And they hired us to find out, one, would residents be interested in rebuilding a relationship with them? And two, how did residents feel about the state of the organization now and how it could change? And so I was tasked with doing that grassroots research. And so through door knocking, going to lots of community meetings, talking to one person who then led me to another person, we met with like 30 street level community leaders, people who would organize their street community group or their church community group that was connected to a direct street or a couple of streets. So it was at this sort of block by block sort of community leadership. Mostly older women that I was talking to about this other large nonprofit organization that was mostly engaged in service. The questions I asked at the time had to do with what is their sort of social history with the organization? What do they think about the kinds of work the organization is doing now, and how might they reinvent their relationship with the organization? And over and over again, what a lot of the leaders said is, you can tell the nature of our relationship with the organization by looking at what we have to go through to get to the door of the organization. So the door of the organization kept coming up over and over and over again. People said, why would we go and work at an organization or try to connect with an organization where you have to ring a doorbell to get in? When you ring it, someone asks you, what do you want? You have to say what particular service you want. If that person or that network or that task couldn't get you the specific service you wanted, you wouldn't be let in. And so they kept talking about this door and why would one be interested in being in a relationship with this organization if they couldn't even get in the door? And so after hearing that a bunch of times, I talked to my other lead on the project who was doing the internal meeting with program and board members. And we decided to combine what we had found and make some propositions to the organization. And one of the propositions for reigniting or changing how they interact with their neighbors was to invite them all to an event to face the door and tear it down. So we said if you look at this door and you look at what the door represents and you look at what the door has come to mean for this sort of breaking down, the door is representing the disconnect between you and a community. A way through is to do a ritual sacrifice to the door and ask people to come in and figure out how to think through the rest of the system. The whole idea was so foreign to the ED and to the board that they almost like disconnected from the whole project. And yet, they were so poised for this kind of poetic change. That really was the heart or the beginning of what then led me to the design studio. And what really was going on for me, in case you guys don't know this about me, Marina knows this a lot about me. I think a lot about knowing and knowledge, what constitutes knowledge. I'm sort of how might I put this? A layperson's or a unprofessional epistemologist. Like I'm always thinking about what constitutes knowledge, how is knowledge made into power? And what really shocked me here was what we said wasn't within the regime of the knowable for this organization. Like it couldn't be seen as a viable way of approaching what constitutes the social and how the social can be changed. So they were looking for a set of responses that fit into a grid of intelligibility that matches programs. So they were thinking, let's get high on organizer, let's do this, let's do that, things that sort of match their own discourse about programming. When we came back with this sort of weirdo kind of artsy ritual thing, it couldn't be understood. And that really stuck with me because it just hit me how many opportunities we're missing in the social change sector because ways of understanding the different ways of understanding what constitutes the world aren't intelligible to us all. And so one of the things we thought a lot about is that this way of thinking and doing and this sort of intelligence undergirding this way of thinking and doing that we had proposed to this organization would have been more legitimate, seemed viable, potentially to artists, potentially to people with a kind of cultural training and background. And so in a way, the studio has still been trying to answer the question, how do we make these kinds of changes more, how do we make these kinds of gestures more reasonable to straights, like just straight edged people who've been trained in kind of policy think and who come at the world through a kind of logical understanding of the world. And how do we make this way of practicing more acceptable amongst people who are interested in creating new worlds? So we went to MIT. I found out about the role that design plays as a methodology to helping people imagine, and was very excited about design and sort of design research and research and development as a metaphor and a set of tactics and practices through which to organize this way of trying to make these kinds of experiments that we had proposed more reasonable and rational, or at least approachable. And through that, started the Design Studio for Social Intervention. And the first set of people that we initially started working with, the first set of people who were interested in working with us were young people. People who were coming out of the youth organizing sector locally and regionally within Boston. We at this point, we're still a very small organization. This is our very first body of sort of paid for work. And young people were really struggling with, at the time, not that it's not true now, but at this time, in the like early 2000s, 2002, 3, 4, we were dealing with a lot of horizontal violence here in Boston, where lots of young people were dying. It was a very scary time. And young people were interested in trying to imagine new, different ways to think about and address youth violence out of sort of individualizing blame bad people or bad young people. Like if we could, the frame that they were interested in critiquing was this idea that horizontal violence was a product of bad kids who, if removed, would make the situation better. They understood something else was going on, and so we were interested in helping them experiment and articulate what else is going on, and then come up with other ways to think about the problem. So we did a deep sort of body of co-design research, co-design prototyping, and really looking for other ways to think about how to even get into the weeds of what was going on with young people. And one thing came up that we thought would be an interesting new way, and to actually start experimenting with new ways to conceive of and solve, not necessarily solve, but interfere with this problem. And one of the things that came up over and over again was this idea of the screw face or the grill. And it was this idea that young people have become habituated to, if one young person looks at another young person or makes eye contact in public or in sort of school settings or in other settings, and they didn't know each other, that the possibility of that going from eye contact to what are you looking at was very, very high and very, very common. It was a common sort of cultural, social practice to make eye contact and that get from eye contact to an altercation. Not necessarily always a violent altercation, but definitely an affective one. Definitely one that would move through a kind of emotional register. And when I heard that, and a set of us doing the design research with young people, we stopped and said, what? And they started, and people were like, what are you talking about? Like what? Like, and so people started describing the different situations that they had that day, that week, that month, they had seen through this sort of peculiar relationship of encountering someone you may or may not know, making eye contact, and then deciding from that contact, or not even making it, it was outside of the level of decision. It was totally in the level of what's already baked into the cultural context, is this is a way you respond. And it's sort of like, was this double bind in relationship or in relationality. Like if you get caught in it, you can't bow out and say sorry, because then you're considered, a sucker. And if you go too far in, then you could wind up really, getting and hurting each other. And so we said, this is the kind of thing we need to be looking at, not looking at individuals as good or bad, but looking at these sort of agreements that are operating in the larger zeitgeist that are organizing our behavior in ways that we don't think we can do anything about. And so that project was definitely one of the projects that really sort of helped us make the distinction between how we were thinking about how to constitute what a problem is. And the project that came out of it was really our first sort of formal social intervention. It was called the GROW Project. We did a lot of other projects, but this was the main project that really sort of surfaced through the first year of work we did, where we would go out in public squares here in Boston, primarily where young people were after high school, like either going home or on their way to a youth program or just out in public. And we would set up this large Polaroid system where young people would hold a frame in front and be behind a yellow backdrop and take a picture giving their best grill. And all they had to do was make the look that they would make if somebody caught their eye and not say anything. And the activists, the young people we were working with were so confused by the idea that we were having people do this and not telling them not to grill, not saying, now grilling is bad, now learn the lesson. And one, which is, you know, I think a question I'll put out for us to have later in the conversation. We still haven't figured out how to translate a lot of these sensibilities around putting people in something and not spoiling it through giving away the moral of the story. We still haven't figured out how to explain why that's so important. But we know that if you disinfect a gesture by telling people what the gesture means, you've already defeated your work. And how to make that make sense as a kind of arc in how we make this kind of practice intelligible is still something we are still trying to think through. From here, I'm gonna show the next sort of big intervention that we came up with, which is Public Kitchen. I'm gonna show a quick video because I think it'll be a good change from my voice to see something else, and then do Cirque and talk a little bit about the organizing framework we've developed coming out of these bodies of research. We're asking people to imagine if people had access to a shared kitchen, a public kitchen, cooking together, learning about food together, sharing recipes together, how having something like that in your neighborhood might change your life. My name's Kenneth Bailey. I'm one of the founders of the Design Studio for Social Intervention. We're a creativity lab for the social justice sector, and we're incredibly invested in reimagining the contemporary public. We were really interested in public infrastructure, and the Public Kitchen was our attempt at introducing a new kind of public infrastructure. So like libraries or public schools or buses. We said, what if we had kitchens that were public that people could use collectively, similar to a library? How might that change social life? So we did a 10-day installation in Upham's Corner that explored that. The hub was the central locus of Public Kitchen, right in the heart of Upham's Corner, next to the Strand Theater. And that's where we had an open space that was open 4 hours a day. You could drop in, have tea, connect with other people who found this idea of Public Kitchen interesting, and keep in touch.
For me, the hub was the best part by far, and I'm a huge fan of the Public Kitchen because I think it really transforms the space, and I think especially in Upham's Corner, which is a really interesting, amazing place to have it, it really gives us opportunity to interact with people, and Upham's Corner is one of those places where there's not a lot of public space.
So the Public Kitchen functioned in a variety of ways. We had a mobile public kitchen that actually went around the neighborhood. We had a chef that did cooking demos at community events in the neighborhood. And then we had events that happened at other parts of the neighborhood of Upham's Corner. Part of our mission is to make people imagine what they wouldn't have imagined otherwise. And so Public Kitchen is an imagination project. We're asking people to imagine an infrastructure that doesn't exist and how that infrastructure, if it did exist, would benefit them.
What would you like to see in a public kitchen, or what is important to see in a public kitchen?
Social system way everybody can network.
I love canning with people. One of my favorite moments this summer was doing a canning workshop here at the Food Project with the neighbors, and it was a lot of fun, and I think that would be something I would really love to do.
Cool.
One of the things that people talked about was being able to actually have a commercial kitchen space, an actual venue where people get to experience cutting and making the food. It's just a greater connection with people too.
I would want to learn from other people because that's the thing. Like it's a little voyeuristic. I'm always wondering what's happening in someone's kitchen, or like what that smell is that I'm smelling. Especially my neighbor. I think I'm just gonna actually knock on their door. They're always making something good.
There is a real desire across walks of life to connect around food. just the range of people that came together around issues of food, for the variety of different reasons that they did, were incredible. And there's a lot of power there. Like, there's a lot of untapped potential to really change our relationship to food, and to change our relationship to the public, and to change our relationship to each other through these kinds of gestures, these kinds of endeavors, like a PK, like a public kitchen. And so we decided to do the public kitchen really as a response to the problem that was being raised around what was framed as childhood obesity. At the time, though, God, when is this, like 2005, 2006? Lots of money was starting to move through public health circles, sort of talking about that lots of young people were too overweight. And a lot of the discourse was about the blaming of kids and parents, and really trying to start to measure and exercise and regulate individual bodies to create better health for young people. And one of the things we said is the problem isn't at the scale of the individual. The problem is at the scale of these infrastructures, at the scale of everyday life. And if you want people to be healthier, we have to imagine new environments. We have to think about the built environment and how do we make the change there versus making the change at the scale of the individual. And out of that, we started to really play with the idea of flipping what we typically think of as private, which is, you know, the privatization of you have to procure your own food, you have to make enough money to do it, you have to prepare it, that your food life is about you and your family. And we said, what if we could queer that? What if we could shift that? What would it look like to take something we typically think about as private and domestic and make it public and infrastructural? So that was where we really came up with the idea of public kitchen. We were also making a nod towards really thinking through the city, like government's role in creating and imagining and participating in making infrastructures that could actually improve the quality of our lives in very, very real concrete ways. So it was also a nod to why we wanted to call them public kitchens, was because we wanted to get public taxes and public investment in public infrastructure. So, and the last piece here with that piece was really about making another nod to the public doesn't necessarily have to always take a backseat to private. And that we could, in fact, have public infrastructures and continue to think through public infrastructures that are lovely and make our lives feel better and beautiful, and not think that the only things that could make us feel more aesthetically or, you know, sort of sensibly better are things that are always in the private domain. So I think I'm going to show you one more example of a project that we did, talk a little bit about the methodologies that we've developed since we've done this work, and open it up to questions, comments, observations. So the last project I want to talk a little bit about, which is the project that I met, that you and I connected on, Marina, is called the Social Emergency Response Center. It really started because of the work and the controversy surrounding the Ferguson uprising, having to do with the first killing that really set off the larger mood in the United States around state-sanctioned violence. When that happened, we saw that a lot of people across different lines of difference didn't know how to make sense of state-sanctioned violence. The people people in the United States tended to think about the problem as a problem for Black people, or as a problem of the cops, or as a problem of white people not knowing. You know, it is. I don't know, I think that's the best way to really say it, is really as a problem for Black people and a problem of the cops, and not a problem that implicated everyone living in this polity or in this civil society or this lack thereof, having to do with the fact that we're paying taxes for these bodies of people to behave in the ways that they are, and that's a problem regardless of who the people are. And so the fact that so many people had such an awkward time getting to that larger frame for us was like a flag. We were like, this is the social emergency that we can't actually, we don't see ourselves connected enough to actually see that this kind of harm happening to anybody in a polity through the state is unacceptable. And other people in other parts of the world were like, how is it that anybody thinks that that's acceptable to happen to anyone? How is it that you haven't shut down your entire nation state? And so we wrote a paper called A Case for Social Emergency Procedures, which was really trying to make the case, not just to Black people or people of color, but to people who consider themselves tax-paying citizens, or sort of using that citizenry kind of frame, that this is what we're seeing with state-sanctioned violence implicates the entire project of democracy. That if what we're trying to do is have a hold on the kind of society we want, we shouldn't be able to allow these kinds of things to happen. And definitely we shouldn't be able to sort of push the blame off on, what we might constitute as the victims to have to handle it alone. We wrote that paper. We got a lot of feedback particularly from one of our really close colleagues, Dr. Mindy Fullilove, who runs University of Orange. She also wrote USHOC, and she said, you guys are really onto something with this idea around a case for social emergency procedures, but we need more. Like, we need you to tell us how to embody it. And so from that, we decided to build out this project called the Social Emergency Response Center. And it just so happened that as we were getting ready to do the initial test, Trump won. And everybody was like, oh my God, like something's different in this culture. And so I just want to give you that background as the kind of context before I show you this next video really quickly. Hold on one second.
Horrifying Trump win underscores the fact that we're all living in a social emergency, even if it affects each of us differently. In other kinds of emergencies like earthquakes or tsunamis, hurricanes, there's emergency response centers to help coordinate food, shelter, information. So we felt like we needed a social emergency response center to take on the real and pressing social emergencies that we are facing right now.
We're creating a space where people can come in and express how they're feeling and then pivot into collective action. By the time people leave, we want them to be able to express what they're doing.
With Trump trying to dangerously narrow the definition of what it means to be an American, circs are places where you can bring your whole damn self. We welcome everyone, from frontline activists to local neighbors, artists, healers, children, and concerned allies. The Cirque is a place where folks can feed their mind, body, and spirit. Cirques include creative action, healing, collective art making, cooking, performances, and more. In emergencies, we need information. The plotting room includes our political workshops, our radical library, and interactive ways of reimagining this work. We're figuring out how we're tracking this storm and how we're reconstructing democracy after it.
Cirques help us recognize we're in a social emergency. They're an orientation space. They help us move from despair, rage, and hopelessness into collective radical action.
It ended up being a space where there's actually room for exchange and you can actually see the change happening.
I've made connections with people that outside the space I don't know about the prospect. That's one of the things that I've met today.
The set is an idea of bringing people together to reflect of what is happening in a given art space, to then reflect how can we organize what we should do. And I think that is an idea that's going to spread.
Boston was just the beginning. Communities around the country are beginning to plan their own social emergency response centers.
Want to join us? Contact us at cert@ds4si.org, and we'll send you a CERT kit to help you get started. So those three examples sort of give you a sense of how we work. And the last piece I want to close on is, out of doing this body of work and other projects, we this was like a quick drive through some of the larger interventions we've done. We did a lot of reflecting and sort of paying attention to the design methodologies that we were developing. And through it, after about a decade, really landed on our own sort of take on the kinds of social design we were or are positing. And that really culminated in a book called Ideas, Arrangements, Effects. This is what the book looks like. The premise of our sort of design research of this methodology that we've developed is Ideas, Arrangements, Effects. It's that big and small ideas about the world, say, the larger isms that we talk about, racism, classism, down to smaller ideas like listen to me or don't listen to them, aren't just floating in the sky. They're not just sort of operating in the abstract. They're operating through things, through situations, through tangible, concrete, what we call hard and soft arrangements. Those arrangements could be the fact that we're all on Zoom right now talking, for me at night and for some of you all during the day. Those arrangements might be, the classroom situation, they might be the work situation. But that these arrangements, or the lack thereof in many cases, are what are producing what we typically think of as social problems, or in our terms, effects. And if we're interested in addressing or grappling with social problems in new and complex ways, we have to quit just seeing problems through the lens and at the scale of effects. We have to see the arrangements out of which those problems are making themselves evident. So to just give you a really simple sort of, we all can agree upon example of arrangements. We have two classrooms side by side. On the left-hand side, we have your typical teacher up in front of a chalkboard and students are in rows. And in the front, you've got your classic student who's very excited, asking a question, and you have your people in the back who are dozing off. We're saying ideas are embedded in the arrangement of the classroom. Ideas are playing out with where the teacher is, how the teacher's standing, where the kids are, why they're sitting and not standing, who's in the back and who's in front. And we can take on the right-hand side, we have another classroom where you have a teacher, again, sitting in a circle instead of in rows, and the students are all facing each other and raising their hands and the like. Here we're saying another idea is embedded in this physical and social arrangement of the teacher sitting with the students and them all being able to face each other. We're not saying have circles, not rows. What we're saying is these are both human-made arrangements that have ideas behind them that can produce different effects for learning in a particular classroom. And the real point we want to make here is we are the agents of doing the arranging. We are, that things are being arranged by us and are arrangeable. So one of the things we're interested in is having people understand that if we understand how arrangements, what arrangements are and how arrangements are working, we could potentially begin to understand how those arrangements are producing things like ADHD in classrooms, or people deciding not to stay in school at all, or smaller things like, you know, people talking in your course, that the assemblage of things and times and culture are doing work. And we need to become literate in those systems, such that we can start to rearrange them, and at a larger scale, read larger systems and rearrange social life. And so it's a book that really asks us to take on the idea of rearranging the social, really borrowing from an older book that Bruno Latour wrote called Reassembling the Social. And we play a lot with trying to make some of the, that kind of assemblage thinking, tying in with systems thinking, something that people can actually approach, because nobody's going to read Bruno Latour except us. And so if you want to get a better sense of how we're thinking about ideas, arrangements, effects, that was a super fast drive-through. You could read the excerpt, you could buy the book. And with that, I'm gonna stop and see if there are any questions and just open up the conversation.